Comes in the name of the Lord.
Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Can people make positive changes in their lives that really last? Dr. Mark Baker has been trying to answer this question for the past 25 years as a clinical psychologist. To discover the answer, he went on a quest to find people who have changed their lives in the most dramatic ways, ending up in the largest maximum security prison in the United States, located in Angola, Louisiana. Once the most brutal prison in the country, Angola was transformed into one of the most effective sites for rehabilitation in the United States. He uses stories from inside Angola, along with his decades of experience as a clinical psychologist, to share with readers the amazing human potential for change and personal growth. Drawing on themes of forgiveness, community, justice, hope, and spirituality, he shows all of us how to change our lives for the better, no matter who we are or what we've done. Dr. Mark Baker has received a PhD in clinical psychology and a master's degree in theology, as well as a certificate in psychodynamic psychotherapy. He serves as the executive director of the Levy Counseling Centers in Pasadena and Santa Monica, California. He's the author of several books, including Jesus, the Greatest Therapist Who Ever Lived, which has more than 2 million copies in print, and is the author of Overcoming Shame, Let Go of Others' Expectation, and Embrace God's Acceptance. Dr. Baker joins us on the second Friday of every month at the 12 o'clock hour, here to discuss his new book, You Can Change, Stories from Angola Prison and the Psychology of Personal Transformation. He is my good friend, my safe person, Dr. Mark Baker. Mark, good to see you.
Good to see you, Eric. It's always good to spend time with you.
It is a wonderful gift and a pleasure that God has brought us together to talk about things that are not only enlightening, but allows you and I to navigate parts of even our own life which are still unfolding, as we found that we were kind of a mirror image in some ways of experiences. And it's brought about transformation in my life. I just had this conversation the other day with my daughter that she said, you know, Dad, I see there's a real difference in you, of your commitment to be the kind of dad that you said you wanted to be, but you weren't. You were committed to business and to traveling and to all the other things, and you kept saying you wanted to, but you just couldn't. Now you've taken the time to actually do it and to be a part, and it's made a huge difference in our relationship and with my granddaughter, so I appreciate that.
Right.
You know, I was thinking that we are facing this coronavirus situation, which actually fulfills the word pestilence in the Bible. Pestilence is an epidemic, contagious, virulent disease which spreads throughout the world. Most people think pestilence are like, you know, flies or gnats, but that's not pestilence in the Bible. Pestilence is exactly what coronavirus is. And so it's something we seem to have no control over. It has a life of its own. It lives longer on surfaces than any other virus that we've ever encountered. So, you know, the flu doesn't live on a wood rail or a stainless steel banister for 12 or 14 hours, but this one does. And so it's defying what we know, which is why they call it a novel coronavirus. If you look on the back of a Lysol can, it says it's effective against coronavirus, but it's effective against this novel one, but it doesn't respond to heat the same way. It has a different morphology, if you will, than similar viruses of the past. And the world is responding in a rather traumatized way.
Right. That's accurate. I think you look at the reaction that we're getting, especially, well, all over the world, but we're here in the United States. Look at the stock market decline over the coronavirus fear. This is the worst ever reactions that we're getting. We've got people who are terrified to go into public, and we're seeing in our counseling centers, if you started off with a baseline of anxiety or fear that was above average, it's through the roof now. People are literally paranoid. And so, and you look at the numbers to date, the number of people who died from coronavirus in the United States is just a fraction of the number of people who died from the flu last year, a fraction. Right. And yet the reaction is one of great terror because of the things that you just said. There's something new going on, and the unknown scares us to death. We're terrified. Why is this here? What's going to happen to me? How can I get that? If it can be on a handrail, I'm not safe, right? And so if you have any issue at all with not feeling safe, that issue is going through the roof for people, and we're seeing it all around.
It's very interesting. In the Bible, Jesus is at a place called Banyas. Banyas is it's one of the three headwaters of the Jordan River, where the water comes out. It was also the place of Pan's temple. And I gave a teaching right there, taking you back into the book of Matthew, where Jesus says today, he asked Peter, who do people say I am? And he says, well, some say you're Elijah, some say you're a prophet. He says, but who do you say I am? He said, well, you're the Son of the living God. And he said, today I stand before you at the gates of hell, and the gates of hell will not prevail, but on this rock I will build my church. Pan was the false god, half man, half goat. If you look in the Greek, you see that in the Bible there's three Greek words for love, three different types of love. We know those: agape, eros, and what's the third one?
The phileo.
Phileo. But if you look in your journal under phobias, you'll find that there's over 2,800 named phobias. There's only 3 names for love. There's over 2,800 phobias. There is popophobia, fear of the Pope. There is fear, there's a name for the phobia of peanut butter sticking to the roof of your mouth. There's fear of chickens. Uh-huh. And these are, yeah. I'm sure that you've had people over your many years in practice come in with various phobias, right. Things that they are afraid of. And isn't it interesting that we call this a pandemic? We call something a panic attack. Mm-hmm. We talk about chaos as pandemonium. Every time we utter the word that begins with the P-A-N, we are paying honor to a false god in this false god Pan that people were making human sacrifices to. They were dropping live babies through this hole in the ground, which was to satisfy and stem this wrath of Pan. And look at how many words we have in the English language and in the world you live in that begin mm-hmm. with the letters P-A-N. Mm-hmm. We've indoctrinated ourselves through language into the acceptance of the incorporation of giving a name to something which honors a false deity.
Right.
We don't recognize it unless you're a Bible guy like me and you pull all those things together to show how it's so easy for us to fall into that counter-biblical position, right, of be anxious for nothing when you're anxious about everything. Right. Fear not. Well, I'm always afraid. We know the words, we just don't apply them because God wasn't talking about what I'm going through.
I think there's a spiritual battle that we're all fighting. And right now, we in America are facing that very battle that you just described. It's Pan versus God. We're in that battle right now. We're all scared to death. You know, I was looking at the stock market before the show right now. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's happened to me and my future and my retirement? I'm not a young man. So I felt that fear. And so we're facing that very dilemma and asking the question, I think, that humans have asked throughout all history: what's stronger, fear or love? What's stronger? Which is more powerful? What's the more powerful God for us to worship? Which is going to get me through this, right? Well, you know, I've asked a psychologist. I've asked that question often to try to understand what makes people tick. And Niccolo Machiavelli said that for a ruler to rule well, it's important for the ruler to be both loved and feared. But if you have to choose, it's better to be feared than loved.
Right.
So this is Niccolo Machiavelli's sort of dictum that he tried to persuade the prince of the time to reinstill him in power, because he wanted to give him a strategy for ruling. Which God should we worship? And Machiavelli says, well, it should be fear. You know, we should teach people to fear, and that's what will get them in line. That's what will make them vote the right way. That's what will make them act the right way. They'll follow me out of fear. Well, I've tested that theory in my research and looking, because Jesus said the opposite of that, and the followers of Jesus said, no, actually, perfect love casts out fear. So if you want to live the most powerful life possible, you have to live a loving life, not one that instills fear in people. That is the very opposite of what many people believe. And I have captains of industry that sit in my office, and they read Niccolo Machiavelli. They actually have read The Prince, and they think, oh, that's the way I should conduct myself. That's how we should live. And politicians are fear mongers. We know that. And so people in America today are having to face this dilemma that we're describing. Am I going to follow Niccolo Machiavelli and the God of Pan, or am I going to follow the God of love? And how do I do that? Does that even work? And what's on my mind is the book I just wrote, and in the prison I went to, that question is asked most fundamentally for the lives of the guys there. And Angola prison, Angola, Louisiana, these men are there for life sentences. They're not getting out. 90% of them will die there. Life is reduced to the basics. How are you going to live through today? Do you have to dominate by fear your environment? Is that how you're going to survive? Or can love possibly be the most powerful way to live? I mean, life is reduced to the basics there. There are no fancy cars. There are no fancy houses. There are no bling. There's nothing to make you have status over other people there. And so life is reduced to its most basic questions. And the guy we talked about last month, Carolina, I want to add a little bit to his story. It was such a great example of this question. He had to answer this question. When he went into Angola prison, he was the most feared man. He said that about himself. His father was the most feared man in the community, and Carolina became the most feared man. And that's how he conducted his life. He would kill men with his bare hands if he needed to, and everybody knew it. And when he came to the prison, he was feared, and he established fear by picking the biggest guy in the room and beating him to a pulp the first day there. That's how you establish your pecking order with fear. Well, Carolina met Christ in the prison, just like Paul on the road to Damascus. We talked about this last time. He was struck deaf and dumb because Christ hit him and blinded him and said, I need you. I want you. I'm gonna take you. And in that moment, the first time in his life, he didn't hate anymore. That's all he knew, was my hatred was gone. I don't know what else happened. And it took the other believers there to help him, like Ananias and Sapphira did for Paul, help him understand what had happened. God has taken you. God has captured your heart. Carolina then became a zealot in prison, and he approached. Actually, the warden sent him to another prison after he'd been there for a couple of years and gone through the seminary and become a leader in the Christian community there. And this man, he walked up to the most feared man in this other prison that he was sent to try to bring moral rehabilitation there, sharing the gospel with him. The man beat him to a pulp. In Carolina, blood spitting out his mouth, threw his arms around him and said, "I love you, brother." And over the period of the next several months, Carolina decided, I'm going to love this man, the most feared man in the prison. And they knew Carolina's reputation. And he was going to love this man. That's all he was going to do. And the man came out of solitary confinement. They put him in Carolina's dormitory, which is an insult in prison life, because if a man beats you, they keep him separate because the man will beat you to death the next time. And Carolina's first thought, because of 45 years of training, was, I'm going to kill this guy. And then he whispers that to God. You know, I'm just going to kill him. And God's whisper back to him is, no, you're going to love him. You're going to love him. And Carolina said, I told you this last time, no, I'm going to kill him, then you can love him. Mm-hmm. I'll send him up to you, and you love him. And he just had heard this whisper back, no, you're going to love this man. So Carolina kept buying him things, putting it on his bunk, asking the guy, what can I give you? And the guy was so confused because it's like, I know he's not afraid of me, but he's giving me all these things. It threw prison economics upside down. You give things to me because you're afraid of me. That's how it works here. We worship Pan here. You don't get it. What religion are you practicing? Because I don't understand you. And Carolina kept doing this. I'm giving you things. What do you need, brother? I'm giving you things. My God tells me I'm to care for you. I'm going to give you these things. And then after 3 months, this man came to sat on Carolina's bunk, and in tears said, stop doing this. Stop doing it. I can't take this anymore. The biggest, strongest, scariest guy in the prison was reduced to tears by love. And he said this to Carolina after the man became a Christian. Later, Carolina said to him, I've got to go. And he said, who's going to teach me about you? He said, well, God will teach you how to live. It will through the Bible, just like he taught me. And the man says to Carolina, you reduced me to love. Reduced me to love, right? Now, that story for me, I'll never forget that story. Carolina told me that story because it shows in its most basic form, asks the question in the most basic form, what is more powerful, fear or love? And I asked the question to myself, could fear have changed that man and made him a doomed person? I don't think so. But love did. Love did. Fear couldn't have, because he was so much ensconced in that culture and worshiping the god of Pan and scaring everybody to death, and admitting then later to Carolina, I had to act that way because I was scared. I had to dominate others because I was afraid. So fear was ruling the man's life, and perfect love literally casts out fear in that man's life. That man now is leading Bible studies and leading other people to Christ and telling them about a more powerful way to live. Which is more powerful, fear or love? When you go to an environment like a maximum security prison, the questions of life get reduced to the basics. And the examples you see there are the most basic. The stuff that competes in the outside world is all reduced. There's just these questions, which is more powerful, fear or love? I've seen examples like that are telling us today in America, how should we then live? What's the answer to the question? How should we then live? I believe it with all my heart because I've seen it, that love is more powerful than fear as a way to live. And I've seen it work in people's lives, like I've seen in Carolina's life. We in America are asking ourselves that question today. Where's going to be the most powerful way for me to live today, fear or love? And how do I do that? How do I do that? Because it can be done. We can do this. We have dramatic examples of how love is a more powerful way to live. You might not think so. You might think, loving people are passive people. Loving people are maybe weak, and that's why they are nice to other people. I've been with Carolina. He's not nice, but he's loving. It's a more powerful way to live. I've seen it, and I believe it. We're going to have to answer that question today in America. How should we then live? We have to ask that question.
It's so interesting that the response to the coronavirus is to dissolve community. It's the wild kingdom principle, is that you're going to chase the weakest and get them to separate from the pack. And then you're going to attack them. And you get the next one and separate them from the pack, and then you're going to attack them. And so all the governments of the world are responding in the same way. Self-quarantine, don't gather, don't communicate. Don't dissolve the community. All sporting events dissolved. Even we're going to see as we're approaching, and no accident in the timing of this thing. What is the largest single day of church attendance? Easter. Okay?
Right.
We're weeks away from Easter. And churches are sending out bulletins now saying we're not going to be giving out communion on Easter. We're not going to be giving out, we're not going to shake your hand on Easter. We're actually going to go and we're going to limit the amount of people at each one of the services. We may have to do 15 services, but no more than 500 people, so we can have you at least 4 pews apart in this Easter service. So it's a response that is breaking up unity, which God says, behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity. That's what you began to see at Angola, that they were now coalescing around this concept of love and this faith in Messiah. And the closer they got, the less bars and gates and locks they needed, because it was the power of the compounding of one, the unity, that broke past the anxiety and the fear and the I mean, imagine you're going to be sent to this place, and your countdown to when you're going to be stabbed or beaten to death. Your internal clock, the button's pushed. It's it's a stopwatch. Okay? You know it's going to happen. You know that you're either going to be shiv, beaten to death, or raped until you're dead. That's the three possible future outcomes. They all wind up with you dying. Living to old age, it's comparable to saying, how many 450-pound, 110-year-olds do you see walking around? None. All right? That's exactly what this prison sentence is all about. But the response is to divide. And I understand. I understand medically about transmission. I get that. But I also get that as believers, we have to either stand on faith and be anxious for nothing and bind our minds to the mind of Messiah, or we can get ourselves into this pandemonium, this run on toilet paper, this belief that I'm not going to have toilet paper.
This is a really important point that you're making, that in psychology, we've discovered a really important distinction between psychological injury and psychological trauma. Injury is an event that's damaging for us and overwhelming for us emotionally, and neurologically we're flooded with painful emotions that we can't handle. That's injury. But it doesn't become a trauma unless we have to suffer that injury alone. People who are traumatized are overwhelmed by psychological injury, and then they have to make sense of it by themselves. Molested children, rape victims who never receive any counsel, Vietnam vets or war vets who have to come home and they're told they can't talk about their feelings. It is suffering alone. It is the isolation part that produces the trauma. We are not created to deal with painful situations well alone. It's all throughout the Bible that the people of God are a community. And what I witnessed in Angola, take Carolina's story, I saw 2 miracles in his life. One, that God reached down and snatched the hatred out of his heart. And 2, there was a community there that could nurture that change and could keep him connected both to each other and to God. Without the community there, I don't know if Carolina would have made it. I don't know if he would have been that seed that fell among the rocks, or the weeds choked it out. I don't know. Community is absolutely essential for us to live the life that God wants us to live. To be anxious for nothing, but by prayer and supplication, let your requests be known to God. The whole phrase is important, which means you're going to be anxious, but it's telling you what to do when you get anxious. Go to God, come together in the community. Do not try to deal with this alone. And we have a dilemma on our hands, and you pointed out quite accurately. To treat with a disease, first you quarantine people thinking they might have it. Then once they have it, then you isolate them. That's the medical procedure. So isolation is part of the treatment of the disease, and it's the worst thing to do for us spiritually, to isolate. So we have a battle on our hands. We have to say to people, well, you got to figure out how to stay connected to God and others in the midst of this, because the disease wants to isolate you. Satan wants to isolate you. God wants to unify you. And for us to survive this, we've got to figure out how to come together as a community when this disease is very likely going to isolate maybe half the country. We don't know yet. We don't know where this is going, but we do know the God that's going to go through it with us, and that's the God that wants us to stay connected to Him and stay connected to each other. We've got a challenge on our hands. I thank God for technology. I just got a phone call from my pastor saying, "Hey, listen, I don't want you to come to church physically this Sunday. I want you to go online, and we're going to fellowship that way. I want you to be with us online this Sunday." He's never said that. In decades, I've never heard that. But we've got to figure out how to stay as a community connected. That's how we deal with psychologically painful events, to keep them from becoming traumatic, because we have to keep the community connected.
We did that with leprosy. Here you have this communicable disease, and so what did you do? You put lepers together with other lepers, and they had a leper colony. Mm-hmm. So they had almost a ministry of suffering that they all shared in common. That they were able to have community even in leprosy. We've got to find a way that so you're corona positive, then let's have prayer meetings with all corona positive people, mm-hmm. and go sanitize a room at the church and have somebody with a can of Lysol, and you clean it when they get there, and you clean it when they leave, and you provide a gathering place for everybody that's tested positive for corona. We're looking at mortality rates that are not by any means scary. It's not like 30% of all people that contract it die. Even on the higher ends of the numbers, and it's age specific.
Right.
There's as is pneumonia is age. More 80-year-olds and above die of pneumonia than 14 and below. Well, okay, because you're older, you're less ability to fight the infection. Then there's you and I, and we got thrown into the higher end of the spectrum, and I just said, all right, well, I'm just going to change my year of birth on the paperwork, and I'm no longer a part of that group.
That's your solution.
I just increased my odds by 50% that I'm going to be fine. So I just changed the number. How does it know? That's my question. It's like, how does the coronavirus know how old I am?
It does. I think you fooled it. Fortunately for me, my wife has always had a stockpile of hand sanitizer, so we're good for months. That's her thing.
Right.
So I've got it in my car. I keep it with me all the time.
As have I, because I shake hands all day long, and I do funerals, and I do weddings, and teachings, and I'm out around the sneezers and the coughers and the hackers, and really they should have like a super soaker that you're the one coughing, I'm not coughing, let me hose you down, like what was it, Ghostbusters?
Yeah.
Let me deal with you as the problem. I'm fine. You're coughing, I'm not coughing. We're talking with Dr. Mark Baker author of a new book called You Can Change, Stories from Angola Prison and the Psychology of Personal Transformation. Very much parallels the anxiety and fear of the men that were incarcerated who, through a transformational process of relationship, of community, of coming together and believing in something bigger than themselves, took this maximum security penitentiary to a level of virtually a recovery center for those who were sentenced to life in prison, who could now live a life with the Lord of finding joy even in the worst of conditions. If it can happen to them, then it certainly can happen to us in the face of something that is, in their case, their situation was 100% lethal. They were all sentenced to die in prison. We are facing nothing like that. So if it works for them, why would it not work for us? And that is faith in the love that God has for us. It says God is love, and that we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, and all our strength. And we're to love our neighbor as ourselves, whether they're infected or not infected. We have to find a way to minister and to teach people. And this may be the opening they need when they get a diagnosis. People are much more open to hearing something new when bad news comes. Good news, doing something right, you learn nothing from it. Doing something wrong is when the learning begins. Hearing bad news is when you become open to alternative methods of therapy and what the enemy intends for evil, God can and will work for his good so that many will be saved. So our conversation needs to be our response to our neighbors and to our friends and to our community in a time when we're facing this new epidemic called coronavirus. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back with Dr. Mark Baker. Shalom, I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nations Ministry. Our ministry is a teaching ministry, and through our television programs, Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Revealing Prophecy, we share a wealth of information with you. We conduct in-person teachings around the state of Alabama every week. Over the course of the past 12 years, I've compiled an extraordinary library of sermons, teachings, video series, and commentaries that all bring a Jewish believer's perspective to the Bible. As a ministry, it's our desire that these teachings be made available to everyone. That is why we have created the Biblical Truth Library that allows you unlimited access to all of the audio and video teachings for a fraction of the cost. Imagine being able to study alongside a Messianic rabbi at your own pace and learn about prophecy, Islam, Judaism, Jesus' life, the prophetic significance of the Feast of Israel, and so much more for just a small monthly, quarterly, or annual subscription price. In addition, 2 new classes are added to the library every week. These teachings, if purchased individually, would cost over $3,000, but for as little as 50 cents a day, you can have unlimited access to every sermon, every teaching, every course, and learn at your own pace, and your access fee is tax deductible. You can watch on any smartphone, tablet, PC, or smart TV, and can start and pause the teaching at any time and start right back up when you are ready to continue. I want to personally invite you to explore the Biblical Truth Library and gain insights into the Scripture like you have never had before. Simply select the subscription option that's best for you. Visit ignitinganation.com and click on the Biblical Truth Library to start your learning journey with me today. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. We're talking with Dr. Mark Baker, author of Overcoming Shame and his latest book, You Can Change, Stories from Angola Prison and the Psychology of Personal Transformation. Mark, welcome back to the program.
Good to see you as always.
Mark, so here you have a situation where the response is a response of love to a known enemy. It's a seen enemy. Okay. Here we are facing an unseen enemy. That becomes the almost the harbinger of the dark night of the soul, the boogeyman, the monster on the bed, the one in the closet, the thing we feared when we were little kids of hiding behind the curtain, why we had a flashlight, a night light, why we cried out and mom and dad came and turned on the light and opened up the doors to show us there was nothing there. Well, we can't see this. And we struggle with faith, as God says, listen, you trust and believe in something you cannot see.
Right.
How much more so than the one standing in front of you that you can see, should you believe in him? Here we're faced with something that is known but not seen. Don't know where it's living. So we are going to extraordinary measures of trying to sanitize and avoid and do all these things. And, I have a 93-year-old mother. She's in great health, but in isolation, her health could suffer because of isolation. Mm-hmm. So if she's locked away in her apartment. She's a very social person. She's locked away for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time, and doesn't have any social interaction. Winds up sleeping. She stays in bed too long, then the body's not processing fluids, and all of a sudden it settles in the lungs, and things begin to manifest themselves. Have nothing to do with coronavirus. Have to do with the life of isolation, inactivity, sedentary, eating habits, all the things people turn to. How can we grab a hold of and put not a death grip, but a life grip on the Word of God and impart that to others? First, be secure in ourselves, which is where we have to start. How do we go about doing that? How do we not let ourselves be impacted by the overzealous media and the oversharing of information?
For me, the core has to do with dealing with the isolation. Like we were just talking about, we quarantine those we think might have it, and we isolate those that do. This is how you treat it. Now we have social distancing is the new thing, where we're not going to have large gatherings. We're going to keep distance. We're going to be 4 pews away from the person we're worshiping with. That's how we're going to treat with this. All of that, while medically is sound, and I think we need to follow medical advice, spiritually and psychologically is very dangerous. We were not created to do well in isolation. We have to figure out how to embrace this crisis in a way that's meaningful spiritually and psychologically as well as physically. So we don't just have a physical battle. What you're describing is a spiritual battle. And those of us who are spiritual people have to be aware that this battle is coming to us on 2 levels. I want to do what the medical doctors are telling me to do, but I'm going to also battle this with God on my side. So whether you think you're going to get the virus, or there may be people who are listening to us right now who already have it, your spiritual task is the same, which is to figure out how to embrace suffering. We need to have a concept, a theology of suffering. We need to understand what is going on here. I heard a video this week of a pastor who was saying he thinks God has sent this virus because look at the outside reaction we're getting. And look at how terrified people are when we only had 39 people die so far this year. Why are we all so afraid? He thinks it's a spiritual thing that's going on, and that this is an opportunity for our president to call us all to a national day of prayer. This was his solution, and we could say, oh wait, this isn't to be feared. This is from God.
Right.
God's telling us to turn to Him. This is something that we should all respond to in a spiritual way. Well, I don't know if God has sent the virus. I'm maybe, but I'm not there yet. What I am there with is God has told us how to respond to it. That's quite clear, and I think God comes to us in our suffering much more clearly than any other place. You know, when Moses was up on the mountain and he said, God, I want to see your face. Show me your face. You know, God said, well, I could do that, but it'd kill you. You know, nobody can handle that much glory. So I tell you what, I'm going to walk past you and you can see my backside. Well, Martin Luther made a whole theology out of that. He called it the theology of the cross. He said, you think that God is most real in worship or in praise or in mountaintop experiences, or when we're looking into God's glory. We think as humans, well, that's where I'll really believe in God if I'm getting everything I wanted. God says to us is no, that's not where I'm most real. Martin Luther says God is most real when we see his backside, and that for Martin Luther meant in suffering. When God is most real to us is not when everything is going well. It's when everything is not going well and we still find God in that moment. That's when God is most real. So we in America now are facing that moment. We have an opportunity to be most terrified. And if you have the virus, you have an opportunity to wonder, is this my life sentence? Is this it for me? Is my ticket getting punched here? That's the moment where you can find God. If you look for his backside, you'll find God in that moment. He will be more real to you in that moment than any glory experience, than any blessing you've ever gotten, than any success you've ever had. God's more real in those moments. And I think Martin Luther was right. I think there's a paradox in the way that God has created the universe, that this suffering that we all think, oh my gosh, it's tragic, it's awful, and how could God allow this to happen? And my response, because of reading Martin Luther, is, what are you talking about? This is an opportunity for you. This is not how could God allow this to happen moment. This is, where is God in the midst of this moment? This is an opportunity for us to find our relationship with God and with each other. This is, I think, the antidote to the isolation, is to realize that suffering, the darkness and suffering tempts to separate us from God and others. That does not have to win. We can find God and community of others in the midst of our suffering, and that's the most powerful way to live, both psychologically and spiritually. Now, it's tricky because medically, the doctors are saying, no, you want to stay disconnected from other people. And we're saying as spiritual people, no, we're going to figure out how to stay connected. I love your suggestion. Let's have prayer, let's have worship services for those who already have it. I mean, that's brilliant. Let's go there. What can you do to me now, right?
Exactly. You know, you know, that was the whole leper colony scenario. Okay, so let me group you together, and we'll minister to you, and we'll get food to you, and we'll get whatever you need to you, and you can, you know, be together and have community. You know, it's interesting how the responses are, because there are prayer gatherings at the Western Wall in a country who's shuttered their borders and are expecting 60% of the population to test positive. Testing positive doesn't mean that you manifest symptoms. It's like many other things you can test positive for and it never develops. You can be HIV positive and never develop AIDS. It has to do with your immune system and all those other things. So they have a country which has shuttered its borders. They're quarantining all visitors for 14 days. Yet these groups are gathering at the wall, praying, knowing they're in. I mean, the Kotel, the Western Wall area, is not very big. You get 10,000 people in there, and you're one on top of the other. And they're saying, we don't want people in close proximity. And they're saying, wait a second, we're coming to the place of prayer to pray in agreement and to lift up one voice to the God of Israel on behalf not just of Israel, but they were the first to thousands of them gathered when China came out with the diagnosis. The wall was packed with people interceding for China because it says nearly 1,000 people gathered on February 17th to pray for China. 1,000 people at the wall is a lot of people. Okay? It's a lot of people. To intercede for a country that is not a neighbor, it's just a country that's going through a difficult time. Right. That's the heart of prayer. That's the heart of faith at work, is to say, you know what? If I go to this prayer meeting and that's where I get it, serving the Lord, then I'm okay with that.
Right.
You know, I go to Israel every year. We had to cancel this year because of the virus, not our choice. We still would have gone. And my feeling is people say, well, aren't you Concerned that something might happen to you there? I said, I'm going to wind up there anyways.
Right. See, that's the spiritual and emotional pull within us. That's the image of God, I believe, in all of us. It says, no, we want to be together and one voice face this. What's coming to my mind is after 9/11, you know, the terrorists thought, okay, we're going to scare Americans and they're going to scatter because we've terrified them. You're not safe anywhere. You go into work, we're going to blow up your building. And they had hoped we would all isolate and hide. And what happened the day after 9/11? People poured out by the thousands to give blood. Here in Los Angeles, you had to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 hours in line to give blood for people in New York I've never met. That was the image of God in us saying, no, come together to support those in need. And that's how we fight psychologically and spiritually the terror we're all facing now. How are we going to fight this fear? Come together. Don't isolate. Figure out how to do that. It's going to be tricky, but we can figure out how to do that. We can win spiritually this battle that we're facing right now. This is a test for us spiritually and psychologically.
You know, I do see this as a test. I see this as a separation of the sheep and the goats. I see this as a precursor to what lies ahead in the rise of the Antichrist. And as we face these end times, we are told that in the last days that there will be pestilence upon the earth. And is this that pestilence? No, this is a pestilence. Could it be that pestilence? It could be. Don't know. That's one of those things you won't know until afterwards. You're not going to know during. Right. You'll only know after. But if we, as a body of faith, exhibit faith, then we are provoking someone who is in a panic mode, and they look at you and say, why? How can you be so calm when you're facing the exact same thing I am? And my response usually is, I could tell you, but you really don't want to know. And they would go, no, I really want to know. I'm telling you, seriously, I could tell you, but you really don't want the answer. I promise you, you're not going to like it when you hear it. And they go, no, tell me, please tell me. So, okay, I warned you. Okay, it's because I believe in Jesus, and they go, well, yeah, you're right. You know, I really don't like your answer, but I have evidence in the way you've conducted yourself that there's got to be something there, that you're responding to it differently, and you're telling me that's what it is. Yep. So if I grab a hold of this Jesus guy that you grabbed a hold of, I can do that too? Yes, you can. Well, show me. Show me where it says that. Well, I can show you. I can point. I can open up. And I think that this is one of the greatest conversation starters that we can ever have, is that our response as believers should be different to the coronavirus than the non-believer's response. That looks different in everybody. I mean, there's no pattern that says you should do it this way. Right. But I think that we have to maintain a a expression of faith in the sovereignty of God, an expression of faith in the love of God, and that if I have something you need, I'm happy to share it with you. I will not let you suffer.
I think that's really important, and I want to nuance that just a little bit because I think this is really important right now because this is a scary time, right? My master's project was to answer this question: should believers ever be anxious? You know, there's that Philippians thing: "Be anxious for nothing." So maybe people who are true believers are just not going to get anxious. That's what I thought. So I'm going to study this. So we took people, we measured their religion. You can measure that, intrinsic, extrinsic religious orientation. We can kind of ferret out who's a believer and who's just kind of Sunday only, extrinsically religious person. And so we measured that. We took them out in the desert. We left them there overnight. We repelled them off mountains. These desert experience things were really stressful events, right? So we stressed the heck out of everybody. Then we measured their stress level, right? So we got our data in, and I thought, great, I'm going to see the true believers didn't get anxious. Well, you can see where I'm going. They did. If life is stressful, if all you've got is a pocket knife and you're in the desert overnight, you're going to be afraid. If you're in the middle of if you're in a family and everybody around you's got the coronavirus, you're going to get scared and your stress level is going to go up. And I thought, well, shoot, I don't have any data to support my religion here. But then what we did is we measured their anxiety 2 weeks later, everybody. And what we found is the intrinsically religious people, the anxiety all went away and everybody else was still stressed. I could have died out there. Oh my gosh, I'm still afraid. They had nowhere to go with their anxiety. And that's why that whole verse in Philippians now makes sense to me. You know, it says be anxious for nothing, but I think what he's saying is don't worry when you get anxious, there's somewhere to go with it. The people who've got a God in their life that's a personal loving God, they know where to go with their anxiety. They go to him. Your prayer and supplications with thanksgiving go to God. We have a way of dealing with our anxiety. I don't think that verse says now, because of my research, I think, that you're not going to get anxious if you're a believer. But what it does tell us is you've got a really good place to go with it when you do. So if you're out there and you've got the coronavirus, you're going to get it, okay, it's going to scare you. Yeah, you're going to be anxious. But that's not the end of the story. We know where to go with our anxiety. And that's the thing that people come to us and they go, "What? How come you're not still afraid? There's this peace that passes understanding about you that I don't get." It's because I've got somewhere to go with it. I'm not alone. I'm not facing this alone.
You know, it's so interesting that God shows us things in the natural that reflect the supernatural. I do an hour on a treadmill every night now, and I've been doing it now 91 days. I wanted to lose weight. I'd lived so sedentary, writing teachings, writing books, so sedentary. I knew that was not going to be a long-lasting. I was not doing myself any benefit. And so one of the measures is to get my heart rate up to a certain point and then measure the recovery heart rate. After I've stressed it, how long does it take?
Right.
Where am I at 2 minutes after stopping? Where am I at 3 minutes? To show the difference between the stress level and the rest level, how fast I return back to a resting state. This is exactly what you're talking about. Right. Is that we are going to experience stress. But right. How long does it take us to get back to that resting state when we're no longer responding to the stress? And, right. And that you should give yourself permission.
Right.
Allow yourself to, you and I both know how much harm there is in denying an emotion. Right. Or invalidating an emotion is self-destructive. Right. So you have to acknowledge it, put it in perspective, and deal with it, and process it, and let it dissipate. The same way my stressed heart rate and my resting heart rate, that interval, and it makes great sense. Unfortunately, as we always do, we run out of time. But our time with Dr. Mark Baker is always incredibly enlightening. You can get a copy of his new book, You Can Change, by visiting ignitingnation.com and clicking on today's program guide, you'll see his book, You Can Change, and also his book, Overcoming Shame. Both of them are outstanding reads and are eye-openers, door openers, and spirit openers that can affect real change in your life, from your sin response, both to the shame that's occurred in your life and to your circumstances that you're currently in, that you might feel like there's nothing you can do about them, but your attitude about them can certainly be changed. And that's that real change that takes place like it did in the inmates at Angola. Dr. Mark Baker, always a pleasure to be with you, my friend, and I look forward to seeing you next month.
I look forward to that as well.
God bless.
God bless.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.